we'd like to welcome you to our strategic advisory meeting. My name is Sean Langley. I serve as the project coordinator with our Planning, Design, and Development Department. I heard some interesting conversations outside, and so I just want to briefly take a moment to debrief and hear some of those thoughts. So based on the question, how would you like to see the city of Charlotte grow over the next 20 years? What were some of the things you all talked about? Portability. I heard somebody tell me we don't want to be like Atlanta. Right?
I don't know. That has some good things.
Okay.
Atlanta is a black hole. You drive in and never
Whatever.
there are people still wandering the streets, driving around and around it, stopping for gasoline.
Walkability.
Mass transit.
Mass transit. Preserving historical neighborhoods.
Greenways for all.
Greenways for all. It feels like a council meeting. Adaptive reuse of existing buildings. All right.
Education.
Education.
Strong neighborhoods that are connected by good transit and also strong social infrastructure inside the neighborhood.
Everybody hear that?
Diversity in our neighborhoods.
Diversity. Okay.
The political will is the enemy of this group.
Thank you.
Or this meeting.
Whatever the city of being, we all agree to.
A welcoming town.
Welcome to town.
A path to home ownership for low and moderate income people so that we don't keep exacerbating.
I don't snap fingers to that.
A healthy town. Clean air, clean water. Equal opportunity for all sections.
Full opportunity for all sections of the city.
We feel like a community.
Sorry.
Parks and public spaces.
Parks and public spaces.
Let's maintain the feel of a community rather than just a metropolitan area.
Interconnectivity between neighborhoods.
Preserve Green County.
It needs to be founded on our history in terms of repeating, doing the things that make sense, that works, but then also looking specifically at specific wrongs from history and writing them, making sure that the language of the plan and code and the prevailing code that gets put into law deals with code.
Well, I'd like to see a few areas set up as, I'm trying to come up with one word for it, is the problem. Not just green markets, but open air marketplaces where people can, what's the old word for?
Forum. Change the.
Well, yeah, well, that would be one.
Agora? Is that what you're trying to say? An open air market, Agora?
Yeah, that, there was a word for it, but it'll come to me around 3 a.m. But what I mean is places where anybody could come, register, set up a table, sell off their book collection, but also don't have to be large, but nothing, believe me, nothing brings out the people meeting one another better than a good flea market.
To back him up, look at London has street markets like that, Hong Kong, great city, Boston, Amsterdam.
The opposite.
Right. Like open air market.
But all of these are great, high in the sky, lofty objectives, but the city has to look toward fixing the systemic things that's so deep in our society that no matter what you do, you're still gonna have these issues going on. So I know people I talk to would like to see some of the systemic things that are creating some of the things that we have to deal with in the next 20 years addressed.
Improving our criminal justice system. How about reducing displacement?
Reducing displacement.
Are you kidding me?
How about,
We gotta get rid of the people.
if we live in
Oh my God,
neighborhoods,
look at Sorry. Are you kidding? Okay.
we all invest in our neighborhoods and we try to make them better. But then when a developer comes in, the developer's not as invested.
Hold on, everyone. Sorry, please.
People who live in neighborhoods, are invested in our neighborhoods, care about our neighborhoods, care about our neighbors. And we continue to try to make it better. But then when a developer comes in, the developer doesn't have the same goals, perhaps, because they make money get out. And I wish that we had the impetus within the development community to hear more about the long-term rental.
All right, so thank you for your feedback. That's invaluable for us to hear and staff. Before we officially get started, I did want to tell you about a couple of housekeeping rules. So one, there's no food or drinks in the council chamber, and so that's fine. And two, the restroom. So many of you will actually be on the second floor. So we're going to do breakout sessions that we'll soon learn about. But there are restrooms on the second floor, but there's also restrooms in the lobby area as well. So we strongly encourage you to just see one of our staff members if you have any questions. So we do have quite a full agenda, and we're going to try to move expeditiously. And so I will cover a couple things on our agenda, and then I will turn it over to Jay with MIG. MIG is a consulting firm that we partnered with to help us implement the comprehensive plan. So Jay will be talking remotely through a webinar on a few slides, and then we'll go into breakout. We'll break out the element groups where you will spend the remainder of your time. The dot that you have on your name tag should correspond with where you need to go, so we can give you those instructions shortly. We will not be coming back in this chamber, so we strongly encourage you to take all of your belongings with you. So your role as a strategic advisor really is to enrich our planning process by being a sounding board for ideas, concepts, but also bringing your own personal expertise, your own interests. So whether you're a neighborhood leader, a community organizer, an aspiring neighborhood leader, an architect, a developer, whoever you are, or if you're just a concerned person, we value your input. And so you're going to enrich this process, and you're sort of going to get a backstage pass on how the vision sausage is actually made. So through this process, it will sort of be iterative, and you will see more of that as we go along. We also want you to be an advocate for the 2040 comprehensive plan. And so this plan will guide our growth over the next 20 years. And so your input is invaluable to us. But please also know that being a strategic advisor is a 2-year commitment. So we expect and hope that you will attend all upcoming meetings that are planned. Our next advisory board meeting is in January, then followed by that, we'll get a meeting in March, and then one in June or July. So we're kind of giving you a heads up that we will be meeting then. We don't have the dates nailed down yet, but that will be something that will be coming very soon. So we also ask that you be flexible throughout this process. So even though I mentioned 3 dates for our strategic advisory meetings, we may have to meet more than that. It really just kind of depends on how things sort of shape out. Because we seek public input throughout this process, one of the things we're doing is doing a lot of pop-up events. And so we will notify you in advance of when those events will take place. But our intention is really to reach a broad and diverse segment of our Charlotte community. So we want to reach those that are underrepresented groups, those that you traditionally do not hear from, and we want to get their input. So please be open to reading materials, i.e. homework, but also to attending community events, community workshops, to completing questionnaires that relate to our strategic plan. In March, we'll have a series of community workshops, and then we'll notify you about that in advance. And then in June or July, we'll roll out a draft of our comprehensive plan. And so we will sort of have a huge, hopefully, unveiling for that. But even though we're doing a draft of that plan in June or July, we still need your input. We still need you as a strategic advisor. We're only halfway there because we're in phase 2 now, and we're trying to get to phase 4. So now we'll quickly turn it over to Jay with MIG, who is standing by. So take it over, Jay.
All right. Thank you, Sean. And you can hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. Awesome. Yeah, we'll dive in here. So the schedule for the plan, developing the comprehensive plan has been about, or we're about a year in. It's about a 2-year process, and it has several additional months for review and adoption at the tail end. Typically in a planning process like this, there's actually only about, a couple of months typically kind of given to once there's a draft plan, kind of getting to the adoption process. And we're really talking about, up to a 6+ month process to allow folks to get familiar with the content, to digest what is going to be a pretty, meaty plan. And the first phase focused on existing conditions and establishing our vision and goals. The second phase, we'll talk about growth scenarios. That's where we are currently. And as we move into phase 3, we are beginning to test policies and strategies. So if we know where we want to go and who we want to be and sort of what the community should look like, how are we going to get there? And so this work will continue and be refined further throughout phase 3. And then phase 4 is that review, adoption, implementation, and monitoring. Based on the community input in phase 1, we synthesized 3 overarching principles, 5 vision elements, and 8 goals. This framework will be used as a yardstick against which we will measure proposed policies for the comprehensive plan. So the 3 overarching goals, or principles, as you see on the top, are authentic, equitable, and integrated. The 5 vision elements that emerged, and these are kind of the topical areas that will be covered throughout the comprehensive plan development and in the plan itself, are inclusive and diverse, really getting at that equity piece head on. Oops, sorry about that. Livable and connected, healthy and sustainable, prosperous and innovative, and regional. And then our 8 goals include transportation choice, safe, inviting, and distinctive places, thriving economic innovation and opportunity, vibrant arts, culture, and education, health and sustainability, equitable access to services and resources, affordable and diverse housing, and coordinated growth and development. The purpose of scenario planning, which is the main focus of phase 2, is really just about providing us information so we can better understand the impacts or trade-offs associated with our decisions about how we should grow. I heard in some of the initial comments, people were talking about the systemic kind of things that are broken and that we need to address. And this is intended to really get ahead of those ideas and kind of think about what those pieces are and what those trade-offs are as we make decisions. So the computer model for the scenario includes a lot of information, particularly about existing development and also what is in the pipeline. That's meaning what development has been approved but not yet built. So one of the really big inputs into the computer model has been and will continue to be public input from the broader community as well as from you all as strategic advisors. So what does the community want to see in the future? So for phase 2, we developed the board game. It was called Growing Better Places, a More Equitable and Inclusive Charlotte. And that was to inform people about the growth of impacts and trade-offs and different ways of growing, and then to give us input into the model. In the game, players made decisions about where to add new growth and work to add community benefits like parks and transit where they were needed. And then the results each time the game was played informed the development of our preliminary growth scenarios and preferred growth scenario for Charlotte. The results of the game were used to drive the development of the preliminary growth scenarios, which we rolled out about a month and a half ago. And the strategies that were selected became some of the important guidance for the scenarios. So for example, strong support for the transit corridor strategy indicated the major theme for the connected corridor scenario, while mixed-use neighborhood strategy is explored at 2 different scales at both the strong centers and neighborhood nodes, which I'll explain in a second. Where people added new jobs and housing, and the places they chose to do so were considered as the scenarios were mapped out as well. So using those favored strategies and map results, we identified 3 predominant patterns, which are descriptively named strong centers, connected corridors, and neighborhood nodes. These were the conceptual and specific locations, and the specific locations were not as important at this phase in these preliminary scenarios. So each is built from several of the favored strategies as well as the map results. And the modeling also included a business as usual scenario. So the scenarios show what would be most likely based on the total growth, existing policy, and predominant market forces. So our continued growth in the center city and along key transportation corridors kind of was the guidance for business as usual. The strong centers in the lower left, several prominent regional activity centers provided choices for location of jobs, goods, and services throughout the community. In this particular scenario where we were kind of testing, going all in on strong centers, there was less emphasis on transit station areas, more emphasis on connecting the regional centers, and it did assume rail and the CATS 2030 strategic transit plan is built out. For the connected corridors, we went all in on those transit corridors, so more community activity centers along transit corridors, strong emphasis of the stations and connecting to the neighborhoods. And we also assumed rail, like in the strong centers, but also that was supplemented with bus rapid transit, so another type of kind of high capacity, high performance transit on several additional corridors. And the final preliminary scenario was neighborhood nodes. So numerous mixed-use neighborhood centers offering goods and services close to the neighborhoods, additional residential near these centers, less emphasis on transit stations and large regional centers, more focused on small neighborhood corridors, and then localized bus to support the 2030 strategic transit plan build out. So using the game board, we mapped patterns of place type changes for each growth scenario concept. And then we developed input maps that could be coded into the growth model. So modeling was used to test and refine the scenarios. The growth model includes criteria for market readiness. And that's basically kind of market demand that's pulling different types of development close to certain locations. And then also looking at existing infrastructure, which also is attractive to growth and development. The results are included in both maps and performance measures, such as relative cost, the number of households within walking distance to transit, and a series of other metrics that we presented at the last round of community workshops. The role of the preliminary growth scenarios was really to kind of illustrate those high-level trade-offs, to test distinct examples of development patterns, identify desirable patterns, and some of those could be by different areas, and then link back to the vision and goals framework. And a really important note at the bottom there is that these were not intended to be standalone choices. So the scenario input, we actually held a series of community workshops in 3 locations. We also, though, supplemented that with pop-up events, and we offered workshop materials online as well. And so questions about the scenarios were asked about how beneficial each would be to Charlotte as a whole, and when you're looking at the entire community, but also if the pattern distributes growth fairly across different areas of the community, and whether growth seems to be reasonable where individuals live, and if some of those trade-offs associated with the growth made sense for individual areas or for the community as a whole as well. And through that, we collected over 1,200 responses on the preliminary scenarios via those workshops, surveys, and pop-up events. And throughout all of our engagement, and you'll hear more about this in future meetings as well, we really try to make sure that we have a cross-section of Charlotteans with similar demographics and matching that to the actual citywide breakdown. By striving for this, we can be more sure that those participating in the planning process are representative of the population as a whole. So these graphs compare the demographics of who participated and provide demographic information with the citywide mix. And so looking at that last round of input, on race, the kind of split between Black and white residents was pretty representative of Charlotte overall, but Asians and Hispanics were somewhat underrepresented. Looking at that middle graph, older results were underrepresented, while most other populations was fairly proportionate to the overall population. And then for income, wealthier residents were better represented than residents with lower incomes, despite some outreach that we did to try to get some of those populations to participate. So throughout the process, we'll be trying even more methods and hopefully be more effective in getting those folks involved. So we heard a lot of comments. It wasn't just sort of numeric input. We did get some quantitative things that I'll share with you as well, but there were a lot of open-ended input on the scenarios and trade-offs and the kind of the content first on different ways we can grow. And people provided written comments about how all preliminary scenarios should be combined. They liked a lot of different aspects of all of those, and how certain neighborhoods and areas of Charlotte maybe should get more attention to make Charlotte more equitable. People also provided comments on sort of how we were actually engaging them and what the mechanisms were to do so, and the types of information we were providing. So we heard comments about how much information was presented at each stage of the outreach and the level of detail available. And the results were actually quite varied. Some people thought that it was way too much, and other people thought it wasn't enough. So we'll definitely need to take this into consideration when we roll out the draft preferred scenario and some of the framework policies that you'll be working with us on this evening. So what did people say? So the graph at the right shows in-person and online participants' agreement to the statement, the way growth is distributed across Charlotte is fair. Across the business as usual and the three preliminary scenarios. So the first bar, and maybe you can see this here, the first bar here is business as usual, and then we have connected corridors, strong centers, and neighborhood nodes. At the bottom is strongly disagree, so the darkest red, neutral is gray, the darkest green is strongly agree, and then we have more moderate agree, more moderate disagreement in the lighter colors. And so the graph here is showing actually for in-person online participants agreement to the statement, the growth and change shown where I live is reasonable. So about half of people were thinking that it was reasonable across all scenarios. The three preliminary scenarios did perform better if you look at strongly agree and agree and business as usual, but nothing was really jumping out as a front runner there. This next graph shows in-person online participants' agreement to the statement, development under this scenario could help improve Charlotte. The connected corridor scenario did actually jump out a bit here, having the most people who strongly agreed and the most people who agreed. So we'll want to make sure as we're thinking about the policies, as well as the preferred scenario, what that mapping looks like as far as what types of development goes where, what land uses, what places we target in different places. How do we really integrate this idea of connected corridors? Based upon in-person and online feedback on the preliminary scenarios, the business as usual scenario actually wasn't identified as the best for advancing any of the planned goals. So you'll see in the subsequent slides, we're actually kind of coloring these in if they kind of jumped out in the responses that we received. And we think that sort of our suspicion is that the preliminary scenario provided, or those scenarios, the three others, provided attractive enough alternative that participants focused on those concepts and then how we can make those even better, thinking that business as usual probably is not the right way to go. So the strong center scenario was identified as best for a few of these goals, including growth and development, coordinated growth and development, vibrant arts, culture and education, thriving economic innovation and opportunity, and then also safe, inviting, and distinctive places. And we think that these goals rose to the top for this scenario because of the focus on urbanized places with a potential concentration of development, jobs, arts, culture, and education, as well as the ability to have centers with distinct identities. So you'll see equitable access to amenities and resources, transportation choice, affordable housing, and healthy and sustainable did not really perform well in this particular scenario. When we looked at neighborhood nodes, the scenario was identified as likely the best growth pattern for affordable and diverse housing. It did perform well also on vibrant arts, culture, thriving economic innovation and opportunity, and safe and inviting places, as well as equitable access. And comments suggested that residents believe this scenario would help Charlotte's neighborhoods become more distinct, vibrant, and better served. The nodes would help each neighborhood develop its own unique character and could also give Charlotteans a better choice on where to live, work, and play. But participants expressed concern about such a spread out growth pattern, and if the development is spread out, how that might be less efficient and potentially create more congestion and maybe more development pressure on our neighborhoods. And then the last preliminary scenario, the connected corridor scenario, was identified as best for advancing all goals except for safe, inviting, and distinctive places. The scenario performed well in preliminary performance indicators, but there was a sense that the neighborhoods where most of our distinctiveness comes from today doesn't really get much love with the focus on high capacity transit corridors. You can see all those areas kind of in between the blue lines, even on this kind of concept sketch. And participants rated this scenario high on equitable access to amenities and resources at a very high kind of macro level. But the written comments that we looked at suggested a lot of concerns that the majority of residents will be too far from rail corridors to benefit from the transportation and mobility it provides, as well as maybe the shops and restaurants and jobs that would focus along that corridor. This graph shows in-person and online participants' favorite and least favorite performance measures. So you can see here all the different things that we looked at using the model, ranging from market support, and I won't read all of these, but including homes near existing parks, looking at air quality, public infrastructure. And the things that people prioritized least was actually market support. And I think people understand there's an importance to market support, but they don't want that to be the driver of how we grow and evolve and change as a community. So it's something that we need to be cognizant of, but we shouldn't be handcuffed by or hamstrung by. So we'll have to be really creative about what strategies we use to help guide that market support or maybe incentivize development in different places. Things that scored really well as far as just the measure and how important it was to the community included developing near transit, the mix of housing types, and new homes near goods and services. So I wanted to end here before we talk about your charge for this evening in the discussion, talking about this path to a preferred scenario. These preliminary scenarios, as we said, were meant to be kind of educational and exploratory to test some big ideas. But they weren't meant to be the choices per se. And so what we'd like your help in doing is taking that community input and creating a set of policies and a set of model metrics, as we're calling them, sort of the measurables that people do care about, that they really take to heart and they think are essential to creating a great Charlotte in the future. And so we'll take those game inputs and also the inputs on the preliminary scenarios. And tonight you'll be working on the emerging policy framework. That's shown here in the Strategic Advisors Review feedback and input. So you'll have a chance to respond to some things we've synthesized with the staff, but also add brand new ideas if that strikes you. And then we'll take all that input and create this set of framework policies and model metrics. That will then drive a very preliminary preferred scenario, but as you can see, there's a lot of path here to go. So the preliminary preferred scenario will have a first revision and a model run, and we'll look at those different outputs. We're going to check in with council and planning commission. We'll do a second round of the preferred scenario and do a model run and bring that back to you all to get feedback and additional input. We'll revise the preferred scenario and maybe some of the policies even based on your input. And do another model run, and then check in with council and with planning commission before we go out to the broader community. And then we're going to give you a chance to actually kind of process what the community says, because this exercise that we went through this last round, we want your help with moving forward. And so we'll share with you a summary as well as all the details if you want them on what the community has to say about the policy framework, these kind of high-level policies and guiding principles, and then the preferred scenario. And that will then create the revised preferred scenario and model run that will eventually be the preferred growth scenario that gets embedded into the comprehensive plan. And we need to get to that preferred growth scenario, which is going to be a map in essence, kind of saying what types of places we want where are we focusing different types of investment in terms of infrastructure and community benefits. Because then that is going to, and I'll come back to that gray line in a second, but that will inform supporting policies. We're going to do some transportation modeling to ensure that while it may look good from a kind of placemaking, a neighborhood character and identity, and sort of where we're growing jobs and housing perspective, maybe it doesn't work that well on the transportation side. So we're going to do some modeling to check all that. And then we're going to get into implementation. And then throughout, we're going to be working with different departments, partner agencies, the City Council Transportation and Planning Commission review and coordination throughout. So that was a lot. Here is where we get into your task for this evening. What we've done is taken all the input from over the summer with the growth game, as well as the preliminary scenarios, both, or I guess across the workshops, the pop-ups, and the online input. And we've crafted some framework policies, we're calling them. There'll be a lot of policies, kind of policy statements included in the plan itself. But right now, we want to get the high-level things right, the things about sort of where we grow and where we focus. And so there's going to be a set of cards that you'll see. We also have them on posters as well, but you'll be able to interact with, discuss, review, add to, cross things out. We want you to get these things dirty. So one example here is transit and trailer-oriented development. We're calling it, you might have heard of TOD, transit-oriented development. We call this 2TOD, or transit and trails. And so on each of these kind of big high-level framework policies, we have a draft of that. We also have mapping implications. So what would that look like when we kind of translate that to the preferred scenario or the very preliminary draft? And then what are some proposed objectives that go with that? We then, for each of the proposed objectives, have a set of cards as well. And those will tie back to the vision element, if you remember those 5 from the beginning. Also, some potential goals, and so we've left that open if you would like to suggest those, but it would give you a sense of how those perhaps could be measured. And then the goals that will be met. And so the preliminary draft framework policies, they're definitely in progress, but we thought it'd be easier for you all to see something and be able to respond to that. So again, if you want to cross them out completely, go for it. Let us know that. If you want to add some brand new framework policy or objectives, we invite that as well. And then wordsmith to your heart's content. We have overarching policies, for the comprehensive plan. Some adopted and some are new. So we try to reflect that. The preferred scenario mapping guidance is what ultimately what the outcome of this meeting is for you all. But it'll also tee us up for the next couple of times that we meet with you, talking about the proposed objectives. And then we always want to keep in mind how we're circling back and supporting the plan, vision, and goals. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sean. I'll leave this up here for a second, but then I'll turn on video so you guys can see what I look like if you haven't met me before.
If anybody has any questions written on those index cards, if you could pass them down and we'll try to answer any of them questions. You've got them, there's staff all around that'll take them up.
Will those charts and slides be available online?
Yeah, what we actually, Jay, our consultant, actually recorded this as he was doing the presentation. So we will have a little video that you can watch, and we could also provide you the slides and put those online for you. So, in fact, all the time when we have meetings, we always have those materials that we can get them to you, because see them once and it's not enough.
So, what about hard copies?
We typically don't have hard copies. If you wanted to come to our office and get something, we could probably do that for you. We can't send them out to everybody, hard copy.
Questions? All right, so one of the questions that we have is, what is the backup plan Transit 2030 is not built out.
Okay, I'll take this. I'm looking at Jay like he can see me. We can see him, but he can't see me. I'll take a stab at that. The question, what happens if the 2030 system plan is not built out? I think one of the beauties of the comprehensive plan is that we are looking ahead 20 years, but our intent is to update it regularly. So as plans like the transit plan change, or right now Parks and Rec is doing an update of their master plan, other plans are going on, we can capture that with an update of the comprehensive plan. Then we have to make adjustments. My hope is that the 2030 plan gets built out and expanded greatly, which probably leads to this next question. Why should people care if they live near a trail? And I think that's one of the connected corridors. It also talks about trail. We look at trails not just as recreation, although very important piece of recreation, but also transportation. So they provide kind of a lot of bang for your buck, so to speak. Maybe some people would never use a trail. We found in looking, I heard a lot of parks and greenway stuff from this area over here. So I'm looking over there. But one of the things we hear most in most of our public involvement is build more trails, build more green spaces in parks, and that's what people really want because they see a lot of benefits to that for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, Garrett, could I jump in on that one, actually?
Sure.
Yeah, the other thing that I would add is, I think this is a really good example. Obviously, the person who asked the question, maybe they don't see as much benefit in living near a trail, and that's okay. I think what we want to do is not have a one-size-fits-all solution for the entire community. So some of the, as you're talking about policies, and definitely when we get to the mapping, it's okay if there's a variety of housing types, of amenities nearby. We want to provide choice. I think what we want to avoid doing is kind of presupposing what people want. So you all are going to help with that. The broader community will help with that. And hopefully some people can be near trails, some people can be near transit or both. And maybe others, it's really important to them to be near a freeway interchange because they have a longer commute. So that's okay. And we'll want to build that into the future.
And I've got a question here really that speaks to coordinating with the county, talking about particularly parks, but we actually are coordinating with a lot of different divisions, departments within the county because yes, they really have an impact on the physical development of our community, which is the main focus of the comprehensive plan. Like I mentioned, your Parks and Rec has their playbook going on, and actually they have a meeting tonight that's conflicting with this meeting because there's so much going on in the community. We're coordinating with them. They're part of our plan. We're working with them on their plan. We're talking with Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools, trying to leverage that partnership. Lots of different city and county departments are involved in the plan. I think one of the slides that Jay showed, the one that somebody said this afternoon looked like a snake with an arrow through it. That arrow through it was where a lot of that coordination happens at the staff level, and then trying to keep the boards updated as well, the elected and appointed officials. Sean, put down another. Oh, thank you. Does the final plan have any influence on zoning? Definitely. The plan will include kind of an updated, more robust version of land use. We term it place type. It's just a way to categorize land use and design. And that will help guide actually the update of our zoning ordinance. Very similar to how our area plan guided the update to our zoning ordinance in terms of transit-oriented development. Some of you may know that we just recently adopted new zoning districts for transit-oriented development and are actually putting those on the ground now. The comprehensive plan will do that for the other zoning districts. That's one piece of the comprehensive plan, and you might hear a term UDO, or Unified Development Ordinance, which will update our zoning ordinance. Oops. What is our strategy with bike trails? I think I mentioned that we look at trails both as recreation and transportation, and they will be incorporated into our plan. You'll see as you get into your element groups tonight that there's some policy, the framework policy around bikeability and walkability. We're trying to incorporate all that, and you'll have a chance actually to do different objectives, more objectives, more policies around that if you'd like. I think that I've got all of the questions we have, except we have one more coming. Maybe Sean can read it.
Can our plan be used to leverage NCDOT policies for developing and maintaining the roads in our city towards being in accordance with what we want in terms of walkability and bike?
Hey Jay, you want to take that one?
Sure. Can you repeat the question, Garrett?
I was just kidding today.
Oh.
It really has to do with coordinating with NCDOT. And I know in the community, a lot of our roads are controlled by the state. And so that is a big concern. And we will try to coordinate with the state, with the city Department of Transportation, which I think we have several partners here now, with a comprehensive plan as big as it is. We have a lot of partners. We have to touch a lot of areas. That is a definite concern, something that we want to pursue in this process.
How do you make them stop what they're doing?
Well, you know, I don't have like a magic wand. I wish I did. A magic wand and a crystal ball would be great. What we'd like to do now to make sure we have.
How are we actually getting the voice of underrepresented neighborhoods? Because many folks can't make 6 to 8 p.m. meetings in downtown after work, or maybe work schedules are different. So is the plan to go into neighborhoods and folks who are underrepresented and do these kind of presentations and get input? What's the plan for that?
Yeah, one of the things that Jay showed was the circle graphics, the blue white graphics. It showed what the makeup of our community is overall and who we're reaching with the comprehensive plan outreach. And that's exactly what we're doing. We know that people aren't going to come out to us, especially downtown, to public meetings. So most of our outreach is actually going to people, going to places where people already are, whether that's festival events, neighborhood organizations, churches, where people are, and wherever we can get an invitation, we're there. We also have a group of ambassadors. Some of you may also be an ambassador, but those folks are specifically helping us to reach people that aren't typically a part of the process. Because you probably know, if somebody asks you to take a survey, if they ask you personally, you're more apt to take it than somebody you don't know emailing you or coming up to you on the street and asking you a couple questions to get input into the comprehensive plan. So our ambassadors really are connectors to help us get into those areas. So we've done a lot. We're still falling short. We still need more help to get those people at the table. So we're continually trying to find new ideas, new ways to go. And our ambassadors are helping us do that. We'll ask for your help too. If you have ideas, we're all ears. So please, when you go in your breakout groups in particular tonight, there'll be staff there, and if you want to get somebody's email, particularly Sean is kind of our point person in terms of outreach. And so he will take your ideas and see what he can melt there and get us out into the community, because we really do want to hear those voices. And sometimes it's just asking questions differently too.
You have one question.
Yes, I do. I do wonder, will the work that this body is sharing have any influence on the vetting of contracts?
One of the things this, the comprehensive plan will do is help guide the city's capital investments, which sometimes has a lot to do with the contracts. At this point, I'm not sure how we would influence specific contracts and letting. I can't say what will actually come out of this process. I hate to say no, because I think everything is kind of on the table now. That's not the main point, but we never know what's gonna come out. But like I said, it will help guide those capital investments, so projects, road projects, sidewalk projects, bike trails, those sort of things, in the future, which then lead to contracts.
Sorry, I had submitted a question, maybe you answered it, but I didn't hear the answer. And my question was, it seems like the city's already going to connect to the corridors route.
Yeah,
The
that's fine.
The TOD, with the new TOD and all the properties that they're now switching over, rezoning for TOD, that goes through like Plaza Midwood and beyond that. It kind of almost seems like the city's already going that route. So I guess I was just trying to make sure that the input that we have here will have an impact. It almost seems like the city's already going that route.
I kind of agree. You even said that we may want nodes, but didn't realize that's not practical.
Yeah, one of the things that we saw in the business as usual strategy, it really picked up. That's where growth is going now. I mean, as Jay said, in Center City and along those existing rail corridors, and even somewhat along the future rail corridors. And one of the comments we got a lot in the last phase, in the last survey, was that the other scenarios, not the connected corridors, we're not really taking advantage of our rail investment. And we have that already, and there's a great resource for people who really need to build on that. So I think that's why you see that in business as usual, because that's the way it's happening. And then connected corridors is something that people really gravitate to because of that. And to do some of the, just your point about doing some of the other scenarios are going to need probably some incentivizing in order to make that happen in some areas, because it's not going to be from a market perspective. One more question, and then I'm going to have to wrap up, because I want you guys to have at least an hour in your breakout group, because that's where you're going to roll up your sleeves.
Is there any way we can capture and encapsulate some of this updated information and get it as sort of a press update to this group as we're doing this process? Because we all can read and see the news, but it's hard to really focus on what we're trying to be doing with what's really happening now. And I'm thinking maybe you want us to be a little more structured towards a common goal that makes sense with the things that are happening in the present leading towards the future. So it's some way we can get updates that are very pertinent for what we're doing.
Yeah, in your future meetings, that's one of the things that we want to do, is have some of those updates, and particularly in your element groups, because there's some things in your element groups, those will allow us to divide and conquer. So if you're in one element group that really needs to know about X, Y, and Z, but another one is really concerned about A, B, C, we're going to try to provide that information. One of the things is through some homework, like Sean said, as well as, hey, there's these partner events going on. You really should go to this meeting or hear about this. And then also bringing in some folks. So if you're in the inclusive and diverse group, one of the things that is really concerning that group is affordable housing. So maybe we have an affordable housing expert come let you know what's going on in terms of affordable housing in the community right now. And those will be some of the things that we move along. We ask you too, what is it that you need to know about? And so we make sure that we cover that. So I'm going to switch gears here, because like I said, I really want to get you into your breakout groups. And with this size of a group and 5 different places to go, it might take a few minutes to get there. So I have got.
So, Rachel, if you could raise your hand, sorry.
Yes.
That's Rachel over there. For those who have the orange dot or inclusive diverse, please follow Rachel. We're going to room 270.
And if everybody can stay seated until everybody knows where you're going, that would be really great. You just look and see Rachel, she'll take you there, and the rest of us will help. But
all right, and all right, so folks can follow Rachel
in a minute. And then the second group is Livable and Connected. And that's Kathy and Scott. And what color dot is it?
Yeah.
The third group is Healthy and Sustainable.
Bring that.
Green dot, and that's Melanie, Vivian, and Alex. And they're going to room 266 on the second floor. And then the next group is Prosperous and Innovative, Alberto's group. You guys are actually going to the basement. So you don't have to go very far up. And then the last group is our regional group. Everybody know who regional is?
Andy,
And then we've got Bob and Travis and Andy. And they'll take you to room 280.
all right, so.
What was the last one?
Red.
Yeah, oh yeah.
What's the second group?